Sweden in the spotlight in this month's global conversation, a country that's managed to steer itself relatively unscathed through the economic crisis and which is deemed one of the happiest in the world. Yet, youth unemployment, immigration and a rising far right are growing cause for concern. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Sweden's Prime Minister, Fredrik Reinfeldt. Prime Minister, many thanks for joining us on the programme. Would you agree that there is a growing disconnection between the image we have of Sweden and the reality on the ground?
Well, I think for many people there is a need for shaping up with what has, or to follow what has happened with Sweden recently. There is an older image of the welfare ambitions, very linked. But I think we are more a reform-oriented economy that could stand as an example for many others. If you look in today's Sweden, we have been able to have higher growth than many other European countries. We are affected by the financial crisis, but not nearly as much as many other European countries.
OK, well, I'd like to quote the World Economic Forum here. And in their competitiveness survey, they say Sweden's one of the most productive and competitive economies in the world. But you are socially in difficulty. Youth unemployment is very high. It stands at 1 in 4. Would you take responsibility for that? Does your government take responsibility for this failure?
Well, I agree. It's a combination of a very competitive business life. But what we have seen that we have had slowing of results in our educational system for nearly 20 years. I think we, in the past, did not look thoroughly enough into what kind of knowledge actually young people got in the school system, and we are reshaping this now.
When do you think the effects are actually going to take effect? When will you see those figures start dropping?
I would say it's already happening, but you also need growth in your economy. Swedish economy is forecasted to grow 2.5% for 2014. That's one of the best projected growth figures in the European Union. But still, it needs to materialize, because with better growth, it works, because a lot of these young people are not the first choice of employers seeking the perfect employee with the perfect experience, the perfect education. These are the easy ones to get into the labour market. We are talking about a lot of the dropouts, those who do not have the experience, and this is what we are working with now. And that experience, this also explains the high figure for youth unemployment.
And if we go back to this idea of the image and the reality, the image of Sweden that we have as a fair and tolerant society is also being thrown into question. When we look at it from outside, like from my perspective, when the immigrant neighbourhoods blew up in May, that was very shocking for a lot of us, because suddenly Sweden seems like a very polarised society. Would you say that you're seeing a polarisation across Sweden?
Well, partly, but this is not new. We have had that kind of polarisation and discussion in some of our suburbs since the 70s. The rioting to this extent, that was new. Well, what we see is a small group of young men without jobs, very often related to criminal activities, also drug trafficking, and a lot of them believe in using violence against others, against police, against firefighters, and of course they're in themselves problematic, but you should also see that throughout these riots, 95% of the population living there reacted towards these young men, saying, don't destroy our neighborhood, don't destroy this suburb.
But some people are saying that the Swedish model is actually being pushed to its limits now. There's a very high level of ethnic mix in Sweden. I think it stands at about 15%. And people are saying Sweden can't withstand this anymore.
I would disagree. I think we have shown that we have had generations of immigrants coming to Sweden, coming into the Swedish society, making this a very interesting multi-ethnic society in a way which I think is the way forward for the future. The thing that has happened from 70s and onwards is that the generations that have come not as easily as before can come into the labour market. But that is because the complexity of the labour market has grown. It's not as easy as it used to be. And a lot of the refugees, the people coming to Sweden now, have very little or no educational background at all. But I'm saying we can also solve this. We can also increase the hours we are giving in learning Swedish and learning in the school system, also to get them to come up to the thresholds, because we need them. We have an aging society, we have not enough children born in Sweden, so we need these extra people coming to Sweden to be able to lift up and keep our welfare ambitions.
Sweden stood out because it was one of the few countries to give blanket refugee status to Syrians. But it's also probably going to stand against you, isn't it, in terms of the rise in populism in Sweden? Was that something you considered?
Well, this year 7,000 has come from Syria. We should acknowledge that already we have a lot of people with Syrian origin in this country. So a lot of them know people, have relatives that are actually now coming to Sweden. In the past, the Syrians have been very easy compared to other groups to actually integrate into the Swedish society. They are good entrepreneurs, they very often find their way into the labour market. But yes, there is of course those in the Swedish political system that say close the borders, don't let anyone in. I think it's correct to say that they are still in the margin with smaller support than the big majority of the Swedish population that have shown an increase in the support for the idea that we should stand open for immigration.
Yeah, they're in the minority, but it's a growing minority. And I think at the last elections, the Sweden Democrats, the anti-immigration party, its position has basically now doubled. I think they're at 5% there, 10% now. They're your third party. That must be something you take into consideration, is it not, when you look at the immigration situation in Sweden?
They are doubled in opinion polls. That's not the same thing as delivering a result in an election.
But you must consider the opinion polls.
Yes, but I will not follow what we have seen in other parts of Europe. We will not use their language. We will not give them influence. We will isolate them and say that we believe in our open model. I made an agreement in my four-party centre-right coalition with the Green Party, which is very liberal and open in these issues, saying that we should have even more open alternatives for people that want to work in Sweden. So we have probably the most open system for labour migration in the world that you can actually see today. And it's actually working. We have a large increase in people, both with low skills and high skills, coming into the Swedish labour market, working. And this is also now showing our figures that we have a growing part of the workforce that is actually born outside of Sweden.
But if we look across the border in Norway, the anti-immigration party garnered 16% of the vote. You don't think that's something that's going to take place in Sweden? You're coming up to elections next year.
I don't believe in their answers to the solutions we need in Sweden, and I can't say that I want to follow the roadmap that we have seen in other countries to start to use their words, their description, because then I would say something else than I believe in. I believe in an open society. I believe that people from different origins should be able to live together, and I think that you can make that society work.
Because some are saying they could become kingmaker in the next elections. Your coalition is trailing in the polls. You, under no circumstances, would ever negotiate with the Sweden Democrats?
No. We will isolate them from influence, because the only influence they are interested in is a kind of influence where they want to hit on immigrants, and I don't believe in that kind of political answers.
But some people argue that this approach is actually giving them more air to breathe, because if you don't negotiate with them, well, then their arguments can run free.
Yeah, but also in countries that have done the opposite, that has been in negotiations with them, given the political influence, they have also had a tendency to grow. So it more reflects the nervousness in our time when you are confronted with change, when you are confronted with also the fact that it's not only linked to immigrants, it's also part of Sweden where they believe that the future is not here, it's somewhere else. It's also the kind of populism saying that all the political leaders are crooks and they do not want anything good out of life. They are the force that gathers all of these people that are discontent, that dislikes Sweden, dislikes politicians.
As I was saying, your coalition at the moment, and you say you don't necessarily look at the polls, but is trailing in the polls at the moment. Your name's being mentioned more frequently in terms of a possible European Commission president. Those elections are coming up in May 2014. Is that a position that interests you?
No, I'm standing against to try to win a third election, and that's in September of next year. I should also be clear that last mandate period, my coalition were behind 44 out of 48 months, and we still got ahead when we came to election day. It's not the same thing what you can see in our opinion poll, what you could actually achieve on election day.
So you wouldn't stand for Commission President? You're not interested in becoming the future European Commission President?
No, I'm standing as trying to win a third election in September, so that's not possible to combine.
If we look then at Europe and what's going on in Europe, now you've streamlined the government in Sweden, the running of society. If you look at the European apparatus, do you not think it's time that the EU started practicing what it was preaching?
I believe that Europe should be strong when we need Europe, but there is absolutely a tendency for more bureaucracy, more centralization of decision making to Brussels, which actually have no big support outside of Brussels when you look through Europe, and this is also true for Sweden. So more focusing on efficiency, more focusing on streamlining would be good. That's not saying that we do not get a Europe that is strong where we need it. You can combine these two.
Do you get frustrated when you look from your vantage point and you see Southern European countries taking maybe more time than is necessary to put essential reforms into place?
Well, I've been to Southern Europe. I was myself in Portugal in the spring. I've been discussing with my colleagues in Southern Europe. I have the deepest respect for what they are doing. I follow also the protests.
But do you find it frustrating when...
Well, I think they've done a lot. I think now Spain has come quite far with the reforms. The unit cost for labor is shrinking. Both in Spain, you also see this in Greece. There is an increase in need of reforms in Italy, but it's a political tough situation for the Letta government. So I think they've actually done a lot. The frustrating thing with Europe at the moment is that the world economy is reshaping and we are not really competitive in the new situation.
So if things are improving slowly, would you say the austerity measures were a success? A recent poll showed that most Europeans thought they'd failed.
Yes, because their feeling is that it has been hurting them socially and also their economy.
But you'd align yourself with Germany?
I would absolutely say that you need public finances in good order. You need to have good order in public finances, and you need to do other things, structural reforms, to increase your competitiveness when it comes to research and development, labour market flexibility. So I definitely believe that the combination of austerity measures and shrinking unit labour costs that has been done is a good combination for increasing your competitiveness.
And, for example, the Greeks that have been, on the streets pretty much on a daily basis, you must appreciate their perspective, though.
Absolutely. That's what I say. They are very frustrated, and it has been ongoing for many years. Sweden was hit by a very tough contraction of our economy in the early 90s. It took us nearly 10 years to come back. I think this is what we are seeing now in Greece as well. So I understand their frustration, but they have also done a lot on the reforms, but their debt level is still very high, so it's still a fragile situation when you look at Greece.
I think the word frustration is actually probably a very good word when we look at the situation in Europe as a whole. And if we look at Britain, there's a lot of frustration there with Europe, and we see the potential of a referendum. How do you feel about countries opting out of the EU?
Well, this word opting out is in a way already true. As long as you stay inside as member, you could be partly outside of different things. The UK, but also Sweden is outside of the euro. And a lot of the dynamism of the EU work has been inside the Eurozone. So we both believe that we are partly outside and discussing.
This is a bit more drastic, though.
Absolutely. And For Sweden, it's very important that the UK stays in the European Union. This is a like-minded country that believes in trade, believes in openness, believes in enlargement of the European Union. So for us, they are very close to many of our values. I think they are also part of a big economy balancing Germany, France in a way that I think is also important. So I will do whatever I can to help Britain stay inside the European Union, and I hope that the work of David Cameron, where he says, I'm now going to also go through and show the British people why we also gain from the membership of European Union, is very important, because when I follow British media and discussion, very often this is shown in the public eye. It's more always as a threat, always some decisions taken somewhere else.
So if we look at the referendum in Britain, we look at the rise of the far right across Europe, do you think that we're getting to a point where democracy isn't really achieving all that it should?
Well, maybe we have the wrong expectations. In our day and time, you can't just tell the politicians to solve all the problems, because we can't manage everything. I think we should have the right kind of expectations, and that we should be clear with political leaders to build long-term trust with people. This has been possible in Sweden and Northern Europe. You see less of this in southern parts. It's very, very hard to gain trust once you have lost it. And if you lose trust with the people, then you will see a new kind of dynamism that will see growing populism, extremists. So I'm not saying I'm worried about this, but I think too often political leaders go back and saying we can solve everything or we have no problems. That's not leadership to me. Say we have problems and we can only partly solve it. We need to do it together with other parts of our society.
On a lighter note, leaders now are using social media a lot more. I've noticed your foreign minister is very active. I think he's got nearly 250,000 followers. But I noticed you don't have a Twitter account. Why not?
Well, it's a choice I've done. I think either you use Twitter and social media and then you do it very thoroughly and in a way which you can combine, or otherwise you say, I only have 24 hours a day, I have a lot of responsibilities, I have a private life, I want to have a balance in my life, so I have chosen to take away those parts. I mean, it's fairly easy for Swedish people to follow what I think and I believe anyhow, because I'm in the eye of the media attention every day. So for me, this has been a choice I made to be able to preserve my private life and some hours that is not filled with working.
I saw a very funny sketch which was produced, I think, for the Eurovision Song Contest, where you're chastised in a cabinet meeting for not putting your mug in the dishwasher.
That's right.
Now, and you leave with your tail between your legs, apologising and going off to clean up the dishwasher. But it's a parody, but it does kind of show that leaders in Scandinavia are much more accessible, are much more like ordinary people. What would you do that would surprise us in terms of your ordinariness?
Well, first of all, this is very true. We foresee that our leaders are not above us, but among us. This is very important to Swedish people. They want to have me out in everyday life, shopping my meals, attending in a restaurant or something like that. That is not something odd. And this sketch came out from the fact that they know that I like very much to clean and polish, and I've always done so. So I'm known for this, so it's also a reality linked to this. That's why we thought it could be funny.
Prime Minister, many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation.
Thank you.